all of you to the ISO 9001-2015 Critical Points of Review during the Transition Audit Process webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for all of you. All of our participants are on mute, but we absolutely want to answer your questions, and so we invite you to use the question portion of the dashboard. We will make time for your questions at the conclusion of our presentation. Please also note that copies of our presentation will be available for download shortly after it's completed. And this webinar and all other past PGR webinars is also available for reviewing with commentary on our website under previously recorded webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to discuss how transitions are being handled. We'll have a discussion on the projected amount of additional audit time that's going to be needed for a transition. We'll have an extended review of the new audit content. We'll have some summary comments on how the audit to 9001-2015 is going to feel different from 9001-2008. I have some concluding remarks and then your questions. Now, beginning with how the transition will be handled, we offer three approaches that any existing client can use to complete their transition. We want to be as flexible as possible, and we want to accommodate your transition more or less whenever it makes the most sense for you to do your transition. Now, the preferred approach, of course, is to do it as part of a recertification audit. The recertification audit already includes additional audit time. Obviously, it already includes issuance of a new certificate. So that is the ideal approach. But if you wish to complete your transition as part of a surveillance audit, we can absolutely accommodate that as well. If you're currently on an annual surveillance frequency, it would be done in a single step. It will result, in most cases, in a small amount of additional audit time. That's going to vary from case to case. If you happen to be on a semi-annual surveillance frequency, we also have an option where you can do it on 2 consecutive semi-annual surveillances. Now, our preference is that it be done in a single step, but again, we will accommodate 2 consecutive semi-annuals if necessary. Now, in both cases where it's done as part of a surveillance audit, what you'll be receiving is a revision to your 9001-2008 certificate. So let's take a look at how that would work. Let's say that you completed a 9001-2008 certification in late 2015, and you received a certificate in January 2016. So in this case, the cert number would be C2016-12345, issued in January of 2016, and you'll note the expiration, September 14th, 2018. Now that's due, of course, to the mandatory cutoff that was established by the ISO for any ISO 9001-2008 certifications. They will simply no longer be valid after that date because the standard itself will no longer be valid after that date. So in step 2, you then complete a successful transition to 9001-2015, and in this example you're doing so in early 2018. This would then result in a revised certificate. You'll note here that the cert number is the same, C2016-12345, but you'll note that there's now a -R1 for revision 1. You'll note that the issue date is the same, 1/15/16, but now the expiration date is 1/14/19, now showing the full 3-year cycle. Now, as to the projected amount of additional audit time that's going to be necessary, we have an internal grid that we've prepared for calculating additional audit time. Now obviously the full measure of detail on that grid is considered confidential, but we can confirm a couple of details. For most of the average size companies that are going to be seeking a transition over a surveillance audit, they will be looking at an additional half a day, 4 hours of audit time to complete their transition audit. Now there's going to be some companies that will be able to transition with no added audit time at all. Now I'll further share that we do have a special memorandum that we've put together. This is available through either your PJR scheduler or your sales representative. Beginning now with a review of the anticipated new audit content. We did an extensive review of the 9001:2015 standard when it was published, and we identified what we felt were the key new items that would require verification during the transition audit. So we're going to begin now an examination of these items. So we begin in section 4.1. Section 4.1 is really paired with 4.2, and these two sections taken together introduce a key new idea into the world of ISO 9001, and that is this whole idea of external and internal issues, and then external and internal interested parties. So this begins in 4.1 where we ask, has the organization implemented a process? Of course, it's still very much a process-oriented standard. A process to determine, monitor, and review external and internal issues that are relevant to purpose and strategic direction. Now I'll just very briefly point out the term strategic direction. That's actually a term that we're going to dig into a little bit later in our presentation. But in terms of understanding this clause, it's obviously a high-level establishment activity. It comes very early in the standard. It's actually the very first auditable clause in the standard. And in terms of how are we going to approach this? Well, the big picture here is, are you as an organization aware of the issues, both internal and external, that are going to affect what you're doing, are going to affect what you're striving for? So who do we talk to for that? Well, most likely upper management. And we're going to get into how we're going to be addressing discussions with upper management in just a moment. Turning our attention then to clause 4.2, has the organization determined who its interested parties are? And I'm actually going to jump ahead a slide and give you the rest of this picture. In addition to knowing who your interested parties are, do you have a process to monitor and review information about the interested parties and identify what their requirements are? So taking this term interested parties, let's kind of dig into this just a bit. This is a term that comes from Annex SL. It is a mandatory term that's going to appear in all of the ISO standards now. And it's classified as being inclusive of both internal and external parties, internal and external folks. And there's a lot of ideas on who that might be. You know, the older versions of the standard were very much customer driven. And obviously customers are still going to be presumably the most important interested party to any organization, but we recognize that there is a larger picture of who the relevant interested parties are going to be. And so we think about suppliers, we think about employees within the organization, and so forth. So in terms of how this is going to be audited and how we're going to approach this, again, it's going to be heavily dependent on interviewing management, and also looking for evidence that there are effective processes in place for communication, so things like contractual processes, design processes, and so forth. In section 4.3, we've got a little bit of a tweak to the scope requirement. Is the scope appropriate? And does it take into account internal and external issues, interested party requirements, and the products and services of the organization? Now, our approach to this has been simply to add a question to our audit report. The auditor is going to have a look at your scope statement, and really that's not a whole lot different from what we've done in the past. It was implied, I would say, that the scope statement had to be accurate. But nevertheless, this new verbiage now appears in the standard, and we are taking steps to ensure it's upheld. 4.3 also covers this kind of interesting idea that you can seek exemption for any requirement of the standard, not just those that relate to product realization. This is a topic that's actually dug into a bit in my other webinar, Preparing for a Successful Transition. As far as how we're going to approach this, we still have a section within our audit report that talks about exemptions, and our expectation is that you're going to have your exemptions are going to be officially documented. You'll have rationale for your exemptions, just like you do now with permissible exclusions under ISO 9001-2008. Now, turning then to Section 5, in Section 5.1.1, we have a couple of really critical requirements that fall under the banner of leadership. And there's really some impact out of these clauses. Starting with 511A, where it says, has leadership demonstrated that it has taken accountability of the effectiveness of the quality management system? Is leadership making itself accountable for what's going on in the quality management system? And again, I would argue that this is something that was implied in years past, but now they've really kind of nailed this home and said, you know what, this is your quality system. You need to take ownership of it. You need to be an active participant in this quality system, not just a passive observer, so to speak. So what are we looking for? We're looking for participation in management review, in complaint resolution, in corrective action. We're looking to see that management has its hands on the system, so to speak, and that it's leading. So very critical and important new clause here. In 511B, it says that has management assured that the quality policy and objectives are compatible with the strategic direction of the company? Now, policy and objectives are topics that are legacy topics. We've had requirements for quality policy and objectives in the past versions of the standard. But this new idea of aligning it with the strategic direction, this is what makes 511B represent kind of a new idea. So let's dig into strategic direction and what that is all about. Now, interestingly, it's not a term that has received an official definition, at least not yet. We've reviewed ISO 9001 and ISO 9000. Neither standard presents an official understanding of what strategic direction is supposed to mean. So we reached out to some of our friends in the industry, including folks that were participants in the writing of the standard. And the consensus that we received was that strategic direction relates to the organization's vision of where they want to be. This is thinking not a month from now, but 6 months from now, a year from now. And you know, some companies look at this as their mission, their vision, and so forth. The idea is that your quality system should be sufficiently effective that the achievement of your goals now is going to be a positive contributor to achieving your strategic direction later. And so, how do we assess this? How do we audit this? Well, again, we look at the management review process. We'll be looking at operational memos. We'll be interviewing the leadership team. There's a couple of ways that this can be assessed, but the important thing I want to put across here is what this term strategic direction is all about, and how we as a certification body have been instructed to understand it. How is management assured that the quality management system requirements have been integrated into business processes? This is the third subclause under 511. Now, and this actually raised quite a bit of consternation when this requirement was when this requirement was originally written. And it was thought that, well, we're going to be digging into accounting and tax paperwork and all kinds of things like this. That very quickly was cleared up by the powers that be. And what they've explained to us is it's really what they're going for here is let's look at this in terms of there are best practices that are represented by the standard. So what are some of these best practices? Well, think about having control over your documents. Think about having retrievability of your records. Think about having documented evidence that folks in the business processes are competent. Those are all good practices, and that's the way that the writers of the ISO standard that was the tack that they were taking with this particular requirement, that there are good practices that can make a positive contribution to business processes without opening the door per se to having ISO auditors digging around in your financial records. Turning our attention then to section 5.2. Has the organization ensured that the quality policy is available? That's no different, but here's the difference: to all relevant interested parties. Now, in the past, the understanding was always that quality policy was something that you handed out to your employees, and that was kind of where it began and ended. And the writers of the standard clarified that what they meant by this requirement was that they want it to be readily available. The quality policy statement is not something that you're intended to keep secret. It's something that you're intended to kind of promote. This is your leading statement on what you're going for with your quality system. So they clarified the requirement. They said they want it to be available to all relevant interested parties. So then we have to dig into what's meant by available. So again, we reached out and we were told that something as simple as posting it on your front entryway or listing it on your website, things of this nature. These are all acceptable approaches to take in making that quality policy available. Has top management taken the responsibility for managing the system? This was formerly the purview of the management representative. This is something else that's been discussed in my other webinar. The 9001:2015 standard does not have any requirements within it for a management representative. And indeed, some of the guidance documents that have been published have all indicated that the intent is that in terms of running the system, that is going to fall to management. That's going to fall to leadership. Again, this whole idea of accountability that's discussed in 511A. Now, again, we've learned more about the standard and the intent as the months have gone by. And we had a little bit of pushback from the industry. We had some companies that reached out and said, you know what, we really need to have a management representative. We really have to have a focal point for our quality system. And it's been explained that that's okay. You can absolutely have somebody that functions as a coordinator, somebody that is in the role of kind of stewarding the system and so forth. But even if that is what's been put in place, we still have to have assurance that leadership is leading and making itself accountable. So it is possible to have both, and it's just a case of that the system and what we're reviewing would bear that out. Has top management established a means to monitor its processes and ensure that they are delivering intended outputs? This requirement is new only to the extent that it hasn't been quite stated in the standard in this manner before. We've had requirements, of course, for objectives, for key performance indicators. That's what KPI stands for. We've had these requirements for some time, but this business of is management monitoring processes and delivering intended outputs. It was never quite worded just that way in the past versions of the standard. So in terms of how we're going to assess this, it's going to be very much a continuance of what we currently do in reviewing KPIs and objectives. Turning then to Section 6. Section 6, of course, is the primary placeholder for the risk requirement, and it's broken down into a couple pieces. Has a process been established to determine risks? For this, I would direct you to be very familiar with Annex A. Annex A, as I've mentioned in my other presentation, is an extremely helpful portion of the standard, and it provides a lot of explanation on what is the intent behind a particular requirement. And the section that was written for risk management or risk-based thinking, as the standard officially refers to it, is you are not required to have a formal process. What you are required to do is to incorporate risk-based thinking into your existing processes. So in terms of how PJR is going to approach this from the audit standpoint, what we've trained our auditors to do is to have a very open dialogue with the auditee and basically put the question across. What are you doing to incorporate risk-based thinking into your processes? How do you address risks that come up? And there's a lot of things that we can take from ISO 9001-2008 that will contribute in a positive way to this. We can think about, for example, preventive action, management review, contractual review, and so forth. The expectation that we have is, as an organization, you've got your hands around this concept, around this idea. You know what your approach is, and you can explain it upon request to an auditor. 612, of course, is the continuance of the risk requirement. Has a process been established to address the risks that you've identified? So again, we've kind of already covered the intent here. In 6.2, we have the requirements pertaining to objectives. Are quality objectives relevant to the conformity of products, and do they enhance customer satisfaction? Now, of course, objectives is a very broad term, and we still have this expectation that you have measures of effectiveness in place for your processes. But this whole idea of objectives being relevant to product conformity and customer satisfaction, it's a little bit new. Again, we received some clarification on this, and part of what we were told was that an organization is free to establish the objectives that are the most value added for that particular organization. So For example, there are some companies out there that track quote win rate as something that is considered an objective and a measure of a process's effectiveness. Now, that may or may not, depending on your perspective, reflect on conformity of products, or it may not reflect on customer satisfaction. But the idea is that you're permitted to have those kinds of objectives, even if they don't necessarily reflect on conformity of product and customer satisfaction, if you have additional objectives that do. So again, to summarize, you're absolutely allowed to have the objectives that you wish to have, so long as at least some of those objectives address this new requirement. In 622, we have a further clarification or expansion on the objectives requirement. Have the objectives been sufficiently analyzed to make sure that resources are assigned, responsible parties have been identified, that we have a timeline, and that we know how we're going to evaluate these things. This is all activity that I think was implied in the prior versions of the standard, but now it's been made more explicit. Now, as far as PJR's approach to auditing this particular requirement, unchanged. We are still going to be assessing objectives within the body of our audit report. Jumping then to Section 7, we have a couple of items to discuss here. The most important of these is the concept of organizational knowledge. This is actually a brand new term that was introduced with Annex SL. And our understanding of it is that organizational knowledge is something that is made up of two similar but distinct ideas. And the first of these is that organizational knowledge is knowledge that is gained through experience. You know, I'm sure all of our participants today, I'm sure every one of you has a representative in your company that has worked for you and with you for many years. They have knowledge that's essential to their tasks, and if that person stopped showing up one fine day, that would potentially impact your ability to manufacture your product or render your service. That is a form of organizational knowledge. And what the standard is saying here is, you know, okay, what can we do to maintain that organizational knowledge? What can we do to make that organizational knowledge available? So, you know, you think about that. How do you go about disseminating knowledge that somebody has to other less experienced members of your organization? We can think about cross-training. We can think about enhancing training methods. We can think about enhancing production controls. We can think about improving people working together, having rotations of departments and things of this nature. So that's one half of organizational knowledge. The other half has to do with what I like to refer to as learning from past mistakes. This is also a form of risk-based thinking, and you know, the whole idea that if you have something that happens and it reflects negatively on your quality system, that you should learn from that. You should be able to improve your processes as a result of this incident. So, well, we can obviously point to corrective action. We can look at production planning, complaint resolution. These are things where these types of lessons are going to be examined and flowed down and hopefully will lead to improved processes. The organizational knowledge requirement also includes an idea that says, do you have a process in place to assess your existing competencies against changing needs and trends? Another form of risk-based thinking. And this whole idea of ongoing competency, this is something that has been long implied, but seldom enforced. The whole idea that not just do we have training records that are maybe 8 to 10 years old for this person, but have we assured that this person is still competent? Have we assured that our staff is ready for the challenges ahead, ready for the challenges that are coming? This is also part and parcel of what makes up the idea of organizational knowledge. From there, we transition to Section 8, and we begin with some items that are related to product design. If an organization is responsible for the design of its products, do the inputs to design include standards or codes of practice? Now, this is something that, again, similar to things that we'd looked at in the past. Of course, previously, we had looked at statutory and regulatory requirements and the impact that those can have on design activity. Now, our method for assessing this is going to be exactly the same. We're still going to be interviewing staff and looking at completed project records. Now, in addition to standards and codes of practice, we are also now told that design inputs need to consider potential consequences of failure due to the nature of the products or services. Kind of an interesting idea. And again, a little bit of a clarifier here. This is going to be obviously very dependent on what it is that you're designing. If you are designing an end user product, potentially you're going to have a lot of things to consider in terms of field failure and so forth. If you are designing rather a very small piece of a much larger design that's being engineered by a customer or perhaps your customer's customer, your ability to consider the consequences of failure is going to be somewhat affected. But again, this is being put across as one more item that you need to consider as an input in the design of your products. We turn then to Section 8.4, which is, of course, the external provider section. And we begin with the 8.4.3e, where it states that you need to have a method to communicate your intentions in the control and monitoring of external provider performance to the external providers. Now, it's been a requirement for some time that you monitor external provider performance, but this is kind of a new layer now in terms of making sure that the external providers are aware of how they're being monitored and how that works. So for most organizations, you've already got effective methods in place for communicating with your external providers, purchase orders, of course, contracts, websites, and so forth. This is a single new piece of information that you need to find a way to provide. That's really what's happening here. In 8.5.3, we have again something that impacts external providers. Have controls been established for external provider property where ownership does not transfer to the organization? Now, this is kind of an interesting item. We've had for many years now this whole idea that customer property you need to be careful with, and if there's damage or loss to customer property, that is recorded and then reported to the customer. Well, the writers of the standard, I think, realized that it's not just going to be customer property. There's also going to be circumstances where the external provider provides you with something. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a need to set up a powder coating operation in your manufacturing plant. It's an expensive process to set up, and so you may find that it is cost effective for you to go into a leasing arrangement with an external provider where they come in, they set up the booth, They maintain the paint supplies. They keep everything maintained, but technically that powder coat booth belongs to the external provider. In that circumstance, this clause would apply. So if there was damage or loss and so forth, you would have proper controls in place. So this could extend to terms of a purchase order, contractual, literature, things of this nature. Now obviously, given the nature of what's in this particular clause, it's our presumption that this clause will be of limited applicability in most cases. In 855, we have a requirement that pertains to post-delivery activities. Again, this requirement is going to be of limited applicability. We're talking about areas such as warranty, recycling, things of this nature. Again, for most organizations, this is going to fall under contractual and planning processes. In 856, we have clauses that are presented that pertain to managing changes. And do we have a process for responding to changes in such a way that conformity with requirements is maintained? Now, change is something that we're all faced with from time to time, and it's necessary for you as an organization to make sure that when things do change, whether it's adding new equipment or turnover in your staff or things of this nature, that those specified requirements, whether they be the ISO 9001 standard itself or the terms of a contract or what have you, that those requirements continue to be upheld. Now this section goes on to say that you need to have a method in place to retain documented information or records about the changes and who authorized the change and what actions arose from the change. Now, the existing techniques that are in place for assessing corrective actions and customer complaint resolution, we feel that these are going to be beneficial to our assessment of this area, but it is not presumed that there will not be necessarily a separate change management system. For some organizations, it might be beneficial to have a more formal change management process. For average companies, corrective action processes will likely be sufficient. With that, we turn our attention to Section 9, and we visit a couple of items that have been added to the management review process. And I'm actually going to go through these kind of in rapid succession, and then we'll get down to the assessment methods. Has the organization structured its management review process in such a way that it includes discussion of internal and external issue changes, including the effect on the strategic direction of the company? Does management review include discussion of external provider or supplier performance? And does management review include an assessment of risk management actions? These are obviously all new items that are introduced by 9001-2015, and they represent an expansion of the list of topics to be covered in the management review meeting. Our assessment of management review is going to be more or less unchanged. We're still going to be looking at management review in the same way that we always have, and I would expect that in most circumstances the management review assessment will come early in the audit process because of how it can lead to audit trails and things of this nature. And that is the very last of the new content items. We're going to turn our attention now to kind of an overall discussion on how the audit is going to feel different. We've concluded that for most companies, the differences are going to be manageable, they're going to be minimal, and they can be summarized in three key areas. Number one, the expanded role of leadership. Number 2, the impact of risk-based thinking requirements. And number 3, the elimination of previously required documentation. Let's start with leadership. As we've explored in our review of the new content, leadership has a much more pronounced role within the quality management system. There's, again, to remind you, this verbiage about leadership making itself accountable and so forth. So PJR, we were compelled to expand those portions of the audit that deal directly with leadership. So what we've done is we've taken our audit report and we've added a special section called Leadership Interview. And we've trained our auditors that you need to sit down with not just the senior executive, the president or what have you, but the team. Who is the leadership team? And we need to direct these questions in kind of a panel fashion to the members of this leadership team. In addition, we have directed our auditors to ensure that leadership is directly involved in the management of the system. And as we mentioned earlier, that could include, are they participants in management review, in the responding to customer complaints, and things of this nature. So this is obviously going to be a different way of the auditor involving the leadership team with the new standard than was before. Targeted review of risk management. As I mentioned earlier, and I've really harped on this theme with my other presentation, a formal process for risk management is not required. So what we've done is we've directed our auditors to ask about risk management and to be prepared to examine the various activities that are presented by the auditee, to ask the question in an open-ended fashion. What have you been doing to address risk-based thinking as part of your process? Well, what is it that you do? Again, we are prepared to accept a variety of approaches, but we need to have assurance that this is something that affects your quality system at large, and it's not just a single activity kind of off on the fringes of your quality system. And then lastly, no more preconceived expectations for documentation. The 9001:2015 standard took a bold step in washing away the last of the lingering requirements for procedures and for a quality manual. This means that as auditors, we cannot demand a procedure for any particular activity. If we are seeing consistent activity in a particular process, or even if we aren't, we can't put our hand up and say, okay, let's look at the procedure for this. Now, if you as an organization choose to maintain a procedure for one activity or another, it is still admissible as audit criteria. We can still look at that procedure and verify that you are following the things that you've written in it. Now, in addition to the requirements that were ushered in by 9001:2015, PJR recently transitioned to an updated version of ISO 17021. That particular standard it's a certifiable standard for registrars. And there are two key new items that are being added to our audit process as a result of the revision to 17021. The first of these has to do with statutory and regulatory requirements. And what we're looking for specifically is not line-by-line compliance, but we're looking to see that you as an organization have an effective process in place for identifying applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and implementing those items. Additionally, we are now being specifically directed to comment on the overall adherence to the IAF expected outcomes publication. Now, I'd like to take a minute and explain what that is. IAF expected outcomes is a document that was published by the IAF in 2012. It was actually a joint publication between the IAF and the ISO. And what it is a series of key ideas that pertain to the larger picture of what a quality management system should mean for the organization that implements it. Now, we've provided a URL here if you want to read it, but on the next slide here, I'll show you the 9 key ideas that are represented by this expected outcomes document. Now, you'll note as you read through these that these are all items that are addressed in the standard itself. Is your quality system suitable for your processes and the products that you make? Are you analyzing and understanding customer needs and expectations? Do you have specificity in your product characteristics in order to meet the applicable requirements? Are you managing your processes in order to achieve expected outcomes? Do you have all of the necessary resources available? Are you monitoring and controlling product characteristics? Are you preventing nonconformance and taking appropriate action when it occurs? Do you have effective processes for internal audit and management review? And are you monitoring, measuring, and attempting to improve your quality management system? So again, as you can see, these are all items that are found and expanded on in the actual standard. In terms of how the audit to 9001:2015 will feel the same, the key aspect of these audits remains the same as it was under 9001:2008, and that is that we audit the organization's stated processes. These audits were never intended to be element-based. Element-based audits have been obsolete for over 15 years. So when we set out to audit an organization, one of the first things that we're supposed to do is learn what are your processes. What are the processes that you've established for your quality system? And that has not changed in going from 9001:2008 to 9001:2015. We still have to learn about what your processes are. We still have to learn about how you're controlling these processes. We still have to sample these processes. And we do so through the same auditing methods that we've always used. We're still going to be observing activity. We're still going to be reviewing documented information. We're still going to be interviewing people. And we still expect that your system will show compliance to the applicable requirements of the standard. In conclusion, PJR stands ready to ensure that your organization experiences a smooth transition to 9001:2015, and we're confident that for the majority of our clients, this transition will proceed with minimal difference from past assessments, and that the new standard will bring with it a host of benefits. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars, ISO 9001:2015, Preparing for a Successful Transition. This presentation is delivered every other month. It's an overview on the development of the standard. We look at the format and layout of the standard. We've got some answers to some common questions. The interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit, that's also shown on a semi-monthly basis. This is an exploration of the crucial topic of processes and how to correctly understand them. And in addition, we have a new presentation, What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit. This is an item that's actually past the development phase. We are actively presenting that webinar now, and I do invite you to check it out. We do want to keep in touch with all of you, and the best way for you to do that is to opt in for future updates by visiting our website at www.pjr.com. If you go to the bottom of our homepage, you'll note a space for you to enter your email address and click subscribe. If you do so, you'll be kept automatically informed of all the latest news. I do thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard, and see if we have questions today. We've got a question about the availability of the slides. We will absolutely be making both the slides and the webinar itself available for reviewing in a short time after we have concluded today. William Fingston asks, is there a minimum number of objectives required in 6.2.1? Well, William, there's a couple of schools of thought on this. One being kind of the obvious idea that it does say quality objectives, plural, meaning more than one. But the general idea is that you will have objectives in sufficient number that the processes of your quality system have representation. So if that means that it's just a handful of very broad objectives, that's fine. If it is more than that, obviously that's also okay. Are there any further questions that I can answer today? Katie Alcala asks, what is the meaning of KPI? Katie, that's an acronym that means either key performance indicator or key process indicator. In most scenarios, the term is considered interchangeable with objective. LaRucia, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. Yellick asks, is the new standard now available for purchase? It absolutely is. It can be purchased at www.iso.org. Received a nice compliment from Teresa Forsyth. You're quite welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation today. Brundaban Patra asks, if the top management appoints a representative of his organization to carry out the ISO system, I think what you're asking is that okay? It's okay to have a key person for coordinating the system. It's not okay for management to wash their hands of the system and say that they've assigned everything to one person. That is no longer going to be acceptable. Management has to be actively involved in the stewardship of their system. That is absolutely mandatory. Carl Sveenson asks, where can we download this presentation? We do have a link on the webinars page that will direct you to where you can download the slides. If you visit our homepage and click on previously recorded webinars. Brundaban Patra also enjoyed the presentation. Shubha Iyer asks, no significance of management representative. There is no mention of a management representative within the standard, but again, if an organization chooses to have a person that they've named management representative, that's fine. But again, the emphasis here is leadership making itself accountable? And is it actively involved in the system? They can't just dump it in one person's lap anymore. Okay. LaRusha Yellick asks, what is the final date that we have to be in compliance with 9001-2015? Well, the official cutoff for the standard itself is September 14th, 2018. PJR, for its part, has established May of 2018 as the cutoff for transition audits. That's to ensure that we are able to process those transition audits and have no lapse of certification. Okay, Brittany Croco, again, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right, says, when you say the completed project review should include the consideration of the consequences of failure, and in other places where consideration is required, what is an effective way to demonstrate such considerations? Well, thinking kind of from the hip, Brittany, I would say that because you're required to have reviews of the design project, one place that I would consider acceptable would be the review minutes, potentially also within the management review process, or there may be notes on the output of the engineering process itself. Shilpa Iyer asks, role of internal auditors in 2015. Unchanged. Internal audits are still required by the standard. The methodologies of the internal audit can also more or less be unchanged. It's still up to the organization to determine how they want the internal audits to be controlled. Our expectation is that the internal audit will be thorough, that it will cover the entire quality management system, and that there will be responses to internal audit findings. So the role, I would say, is unchanged. Anna Parman asks, you say that auditors cannot request procedures but can view them if they are available. Can you elaborate? Well, Anne, if in the context of an audit I learn that there has been a procedure established for an activity like internal audit, I am within my rights to ask to see that procedure since it's been written. If I'm given a procedures manual at the beginning of the audit, I'm obviously permitted to review it. What I can't do is, if upon finding out that you don't have an internal audit procedure, I can't issue a finding and say, well, you're supposed to have one, because you're not. You're no longer required to have an internal audit procedure. Okay. William Fingston asks, if we design our own product but the customer signs off on our drawing, then are we responsible for the design of our product? Well, that's a question that doesn't have quite as much to do with the transitional requirement, William. But the short answer to your question is, if you design your product, yes, you are responsible for it, even if you get a concurring sign-off from your customer. Shilpa Iyer asks, without documented procedures, how can an organization ensure uniformity in implementation? Well, Shilpa, I think there's a lot of people that would share that opinion. And again, I think we're going to find that a lot of our clients are going to retain the procedures that they have now under 9001-2008. But again, the difference is, remember, we can't demand them. We can't say, well, you don't have one, so therefore you have to have one. Again, our procedure is going to continue to be a viable strategy, absolutely. But the difference now is we cannot force you to have them. Okay. My colleague Richard Morley, hello Richard. Question on procedures. If you audit multiple people doing a job and they are not consistent and the process doesn't give good results, can a CAR be written? Well, absolutely. If you're seeing an ineffective or inconsistent procedure in one or more area, that's grounds for a nonconformance, and the organization's response might be to issue a procedure to lend some consistency to that process. Okay. Terry Brandt asks, what about all the documents and supporting documents and their control as well as records retention? Well, Terry, one thing that we cover in my other webinar on 9001 is the term documented information. And to briefly explain, when you read through the standard, wherever you see the phrase retained documented information, that portends a record requirement. So those requirements are still very much part of the standard. There's numerous record requirements. Veronica Carell asks, can we retain procedures and not expose them to auditors? Well, I suppose what you show your auditor is up to you. But speaking for myself, if I find out that you have a procedure, you can definitely expect I'm going to ask to see it, and I'll be within my rights to see it. It's part of how you control your process. Thomas Wanner asks, if we're not required to have written procedures, how is an audit to determine compliance? Sampling. We sample what is happening in that process. We take samples of people that we've interviewed. We take samples of completed records of that process. We observe the process being done. There's a lot more ways to verify compliance to the standard than just reading through a procedure from front to back. Shopayer asks, if an organization is prepared to receive ISO 9001 2008 by December of 2016, when would be the best time for transition? Would it be better to have an annual surveillance first? I think you're asking if they're ready to receive a transition to 2015 by the end of this year. Well, again, timing on transition is going to be an individual matter, a choice, really. And we here at PJR, we're prepared to accommodate a transition whenever it needs to happen. But again, we're recommending that it be done as part of the recertification process. Robert Bruning asks, what are the core elements that require a procedure in 9001-2015? None. There are no required procedures in ISO 9001-2015. Any further questions today? Okay. In 2015, Brundabar Patra asks, in 2015 there is no clause for corrective action and preventive action. Can it be demanded during an audit? Well, Brundabar, there actually is a requirement for corrective action. It's found in Section 10. There is no specific requirement for preventive action, but as I mentioned earlier, there could be use of preventive action as a strategy for meeting the risk-based thinking requirement, or part of the strategy for meeting risk-based thinking requirements. Shopayer asks, are there mandatory record requirements? Yes, several, and more really than I can list in a short verbal response here. What I would recommend you do is read through the standard and look for the phrase retained documented information. Any further questions today? Okay, well, I'll thank all of you for your time. Have a wonderful day.